This hearing will come to order this afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to this afternoon's hearing on the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate. Research and development efforts at the Directorate are crucial to supporting not just the missions of the agencies within DHS, but our country's first responders all over this nation and the world. This subcommittee continues to do all it can to assist the Directorate in its mission to deliver quality technical solutions to all of its stakeholders. In past hearings, the subcommittee has made many recommendations to the Directorate, and I'm very pleased to see that some of these recommendations have been acted upon. In response to stakeholder and subcommittee requests, the Directorate has added a 13th integrated product team to give local fire, rescue, and police workers a direct voice in federal research priorities. I'm also pleased to see that funding for basic research is now 20% of the Directorate's portfolio. As you know, this subcommittee firmly believes that basic research plays a critical role in the R&D process. By increasing the presence of basic research at the Directorate, it has shown a commitment not only to solve today's problems, but also to position itself to meet future challenges. While there have been many improvements at the Directorate, I continue to have some concerns. Although the integrated product teams now include all of the major stakeholders, there seems to be some inconsistency with how efficiently and effectively the IPTs operate. I would like to hear from the witnesses about ways we can ensure that the IPTs are properly organized to enable the highest levels of collaboration amongst the Directorate, between the Directorate and its stakeholders. Finally, there is one area of great concern that has yet to be addressed by the Directorate. Over the course of multiple hearings, this subcommittee has expressed concern about the lack of a comprehensive threat assessment as a foundation for determining research priorities. The current strategic plan does little to define the direction of research activities and is not grounded in a formal threat assessment. I don't find it acceptable. I think the subcommittee has troubles with the thought that plans are made without reference to a proper analysis of threats and the dangers they pose, especially when considering that we rely on the Directorate's plans to protect our country from all future threats. While I'm encouraged by progress in many areas of the Science and Technology Directorate, I am somewhat frustrated at the lack of such a crucial element in the effectiveness of almost a $1 billion research enterprise. I'm eager to hear the witnesses' expert opinions on these concerns and, moreover, would strongly encourage the incoming Undersecretary to address these issues with utmost urgency. And at this point, I would like to recognize my friend and colleague, the gentleman from Nebraska, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing today to examine the activities of the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate. In 2002, this committee played a key role in shaping the creation of DHS, specifically calling for the establishment of an S&T Directorate within the new department to fund R&D and advise the Secretary on S&T related policies. While agency growing pains always present a challenge, in the 7 years since its creation, the Directorate has demonstrated respectable progress, refining its roles and responsibilities and instituting a sound organizational structure and operating processes. However, one of the critical policy challenges the committee recognized in 2002 still remains: development of a true strategic plan to inform, prioritize, and guide the work of the Directorate. In one sense, the absence of a strategic plan reflects the magnitude of the challenge inherent in the department's mission. From our transportation and infrastructure to our food and agricultural system to our land and seaports of entry, just to name a few, the diversity of potential terrorist threats and targets to the homeland is certainly endless. This makes the management and policy issues associated with quantifying and prioritizing risks and associated S&T activities a monumental task. But the high degree of difficulty doesn't make it any less important. Without an effective strategic plan, the Directorate has no foundation from which to systematically guide development of priorities and measure performance toward objectives. So I hope and expect the Directorate will expedite such a plan in the coming months. I also look forward to hearing from the administration excuse me, and other witnesses regarding a number of other more specific issues which are important to the success of the Directorate and the Department going forward. Among these are the evolution of the S&T Directorate's integrated product teams and the balance of and focus on activities across the R&D pipeline, from basic research to technology development. I certainly thank the witnesses for taking your time today, and I do look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. If there are any other members who wish to submit opening statements, the statements will be added to the record at this point. And now I'd like to introduce our witnesses for this afternoon. First, Mr. Brad Buswell is the Acting Undersecretary of the Science and Technology Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Phil Depoy is the Chairman of the Homeland Security Science and Technology Advisory Committee. Mr. David Berteau is the Senior Advisor and Director of the Defense Industrial Initiatives Group at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And finally, Dr. Cindy Williams is the Chair of the Committee on the DHS Science and Technology Directorate of the National Academy of Public Administration. And she is also the Shapiro Visiting Professor of International Affairs at the Elliot School of International Affairs at George Washington University and a Principal Research Scientist at the Security Studies Program at MIT. Each of you will have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record in their entirety, and when you complete all of your testimony, we will begin with questions, and each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. Mr. Buswell, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Chairman Wu, Ranking Member Smith, and other members and staff. It's an honor to appear before you here today, and it's an honor to appear with such a distinguished panel. I commend you on the Assembly. I look forward to talking to you today about the progress that we've made in developing the Science and Technology Directorate and placing ourselves in a position to provide advanced technological solutions to protect the American people and to protect the critical infrastructures that we depend on. As you said, Mr. Chairman, the Directorate is charged with providing technical support and tools to the DHS operating components, and as importantly, or perhaps even more importantly, to our nation's first responders, those brave men and women who are on the front lines of Homeland Security every day. Let me just start by saying I'm grateful for the strong leadership of Secretary Napolitano. She has emphasized consistently the importance of science and technology in securing our nation, and has also repeatedly underscored the importance of strengthening the relationships with the state, local, tribal, and territorial agencies. And I think S&T is making significant inroads in that regard, as you mentioned in your opening statement. Also greatly appreciate the leadership of the Congress and this subcommittee support. The informed counsel of both members and staff has been invaluable to our efforts to position the Directorate for accountability and tangible results. The subcommittee is familiar with the S&T Directorate's efforts over the past 3 years to realign the structure, portfolio, and business operations in an effort to expedite the delivery of advanced technological solutions to our customers, and I'm pleased to report that restructuring has been fully implemented, and we're wholly engaged in responding to the near and the long-term technology capability needs of the components and other customers. You specifically asked that I address 3 areas of interest of the subcommittee's interest to the subcommittee. First of all, our priorities in developing the research and development portfolio, the role of the capstone integrated product teams in determining those priorities, and the role of basic research, both in the overall S&T portfolio and specifically at the university-based centers of excellence. The first 2 are really closely intertwined. The research and development priorities of the Directorate are primarily customer-driven through our capstone integrated product teams, or IPTs. The IPTs provide direct stakeholder input into the selection and prioritization of our research investments, and our customers chair those IPTs. So they establish their capability priorities based on their assessment of risk in the mission areas for which they're responsible. This gets a little bit to your point of a comprehensive threat assessment. We rely on our customers to incorporate the threat that as they see it into their overall risk assessment and identify technology gaps in a priority way to address those risks. The customer-driven Capstone IPT process directly drives about 50% of our overall investment, but it also importantly informs the rest of the portfolio's basic research and innovation. What we learn from our stakeholders through the process about their operations and about their future capability needs helps influence those other investments that we also make and within the innovation and the basic research portfolio. For those reasons, all three of the portfolio members, basic research, innovation, and transition, are participants in the IPT process. As I said, the more insight that we gain, the better we understand and the better we are positioned to identify promising areas of research and explore innovative solutions that are outside the development timeframe or risk tolerance of the nearer-term focused IPT process. While there's room for improvement in any process, I'm pleased with the progress we've made in implementing and institutionalizing the Capstone IPTs. As you said, I'm especially proud of the addition this year of the 13th Capstone IPT in support of the first responders. Happy to provide more information on that during the Q&A session if you're interested. Let me talk quickly about briefly about the basic research portfolio. Basic research really fulfills two very important roles in the S&T Directorate. First, it lays the foundation for future technology development. It's what we use to keep the technology pipeline full. We invest in projects that are addressing capability needs for which we have no near-term solution, or with existing or near-existing technologies, or the solutions are of too high a risk for the customers to be able to rely on. It also allows us to make investments based on what science has to offer. So with a small investment, we may be able to cultivate a promising technology that would yield a significant life-saving capability. Secondly, our investment in basic research, which is conducted primarily at our national laboratories and our university-based centers of excellence, also serves to develop the scientific workforce that this country will need to continue developing scientific understanding and technology in the Homeland Security area, specifically for as far as we're concerned, but in all areas well into the future. And given the broad spectrum of science and technology requirements associated with the Homeland Security mission, we value our relationship with the Department of Energy National Laboratories and with their renowned interdisciplinary capabilities, and as well as the university-based centers of excellence. Let me conclude by addressing the topic that Congressman Smith raised about the development of a strategic plan. The last strategic plan that we published was in June of 2007, following a major reorganization of the Directorate and the research portfolio. As was appropriate at that time, that plan was focused on establishing the business practices that were necessary to make the S&T Directorate relevant to the Homeland Security enterprise. Based upon the strategic goals and objectives that are being identified in the forthcoming Quadrennial Homeland Security Review, we will be updating that strategic plan over the next few months. And this update will be more in line with the guidance published by OMB and GAO for effective strategic planning. So, again, members of the subcommittee, thank you for all you do in support of our mission, and thank you for the opportunity to meet with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buswell. Dr. Depoy, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Smith. In 2008, the HASTAC, as we call the Homeland Security Science and Technology Advisory Committee, I don't know how that pronunciation comes from that acronym, but it's established an assessment panel in response to tasking from the Undersecretary. And in the initial tasking, the panel was asked to review the S&T programs, especially as related to the successful transition of technologies into the ultimate user communities. Consequently, the panel concentrated its review on the S&T transition projects and the newly introduced Capstone IPT structure for management of these efforts. The panel completed its review in the fall of 2008 and published its findings in a report to the Undersecretary. Briefly, the panel concluded, among other things, that during the previous 2 years, the S&T Directorate had done a very commendable job of providing structure and direction, had developed processes to define and collect capability gaps, and established an organization to enable a customer interface, that is the Capstone IPT structure. The panel also commended the Director for the expansion of the University Centers of Excellence program, which performs basic research and trains students in research areas of interest to Homeland Security. Among its findings, the panel reported that although DHS&T had promulgated a strategy in 2007, it was very broad and was not adequate for establishing priorities among the many projects and programs within the S&T Directorate. The capstone IPT structure had made many improvements, but was still immature and untested, and had at that time only one IPT, the ChemBio IPT, had actually completed an entire cycle of the process. And contact with first responders was very limited among the S&T projects. Further, integration of the University Centers of Excellence into the overall work of S&T was inconsistent among the divisions. And the Directorate had made only limited review of the legacy projects, that is, projects that were initiated before the capstone IPT structure was adopted. They had not made reviews to ensure that they were still relevant and still had a customer. After the completion of the initial review, the panel was tasked to conduct a broader review of the Directorate's programs, to include basic and applied research, and to again examine the IPT process since another cycle of collection, prioritization, and funding had occurred after the first review was completed. The panel has not completed its work on this tasking, so the remainder of my observations are not the observations of the panel, but are my own opinions based on our discussions with many members of the Directorate, customers within the operating components of DHS, and some scientists in other agencies who have been members of working groups supporting these IPTs. In the year between our two reviews, very significant progress was made in the Directorate. The Centers of Excellence were aligned with divisions within the Directorate and are now kept much better informed as to the existing projects and issues. And as been stated, a 13th capstone IPT was established to bring first responders into the system. A systems engineering FFRDC was added to the Directorate, which will be a great asset in the determination of requirements, system design, and in development testing and evaluation. And all the capstone IPTs have completed at least one complete cycle of the process at this time and have made a lot of recommendations for further improvements. It is my opinion that first, there is continuing strong support for the capstone IPT structure, both within the Directorate and among most of the IPT customers. However, there are still significant differences in processes for the prioritization of capability gaps among the IPTs and even among different working groups within each IPT. The lack of an adequate S&T strategy results in each working group making its own rules for determining the relative importance of capability gaps. Secondly, although the major advantage of the IPT structure is that it brings customers into the process, some of the customers still do not fully understand their roles in the prioritization of the gaps. And third, one of the major irritants for customers is the continued existence of legacy projects. These projects consume a significant fraction of the resources allocated to the IPTs. The panel was given an estimate of 30 to 40% of the total resources, and they are not part of the annual prioritization process. The acting Undersecretary has recently tasked the panel to add a review of these legacy projects to its current tasking. And finally, it's my opinion that the capstone IPT structure and processes have resulted in major improvements in the work of the Directorate, and further improvements will be made as the structure and processes are refined. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Depoy. Mr. Berteau, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Congressman Smith. It's a great privilege to be here today, and I echo Mr. Buswell's comments that I feel honored to be in the company of the panel that I'm sitting with here, so I'm extremely grateful to you. I note that my statement today and my responses to any questions you may have are my own views and do not necessarily reflect the views of the institution for which I work. I would also note that I'm not sure that they don't reflect those views either, but that's neither here nor there. This committee, of course, as has been noted, played a key role from the beginning in S&T, and I think I note in my statement the dichotomy that apparently exists inside the enabling statute to this day, that on the one hand, the S&T Directorate is responsible for R&D that supports any and all elements of the department, and on the other hand, they are to have a focus both from a strategic planning point of view and a prioritization point of view on chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, or CBRN elements. I say that not because I think there's actually confusion in the department in this regard. I don't actually think there is. What I think that shows is it reflects still a very strong emphasis on the terrorist threat as the driver behind R&D, when in fact a legitimate assessment of all threats and risks would say that there are risks that are much broader than, and in some cases overlap significantly with what we would define as terrorist threats. And I think I come from a background that says an all hazards and all risks and all threats assessment process is inherently important to any strategic plan, not just simply that which is defined in the statute. We know from the history of management that strategic plans do set agendas for agencies, but only if they're actually incorporated into the budget. Resources drives policy way more than policy drives resources, and as a result of that, I think it's important to pay attention not only to the plan, but to look at the execution of that plan as it's reflected in the budget and in the implementation of that budget. There is one problem I would note that's a little bit of an example in that regard of the difficulty of integrating across the department. Since the creation of the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, there's a little bit of a potential dichotomy with responsibility for S&T funding in the department, with radiological and nuclear being dictated more by D&DO than by S&T, and that I think makes it harder to have an integrated S&T plan. I believe actually DHS itself can fix this problem, but it's something that I would note it may be worthy of the committee's attention down the road. I have three comments on your three questions. First, from a strategic planning perspective, it's really critical that a strategic plan be connected to the larger Homeland Security enterprise. It's impossible for an S&T strategic plan by itself to have the validity necessary to say that we're spending our money on the most important priorities. I think it has to flow from a broader Homeland Security enterprise-wide strategic plan, linked in turn to a DHS-level strategic plan, because there's so much of Homeland Security that's outside DHS or even outside the federal government. But there are two other elements that have to come into play. One is those plans have to be assessed against current capability in order to identify capability gaps and capability shortfalls and be able to prioritize what you need to do to fill those gaps. And then in turn, the budgets have to be built reflecting some kind of a judgment of where the risks are and where the benefits are of filling those gaps or addressing those gaps in the budget. This is not only prudent management, it's essential for risk reduction and threat reduction. And I think this committee can encourage DHS towards that broader planning process tied to capability assessments. With regard to the IPTs, I certainly echo what my colleague to the right has said. They are playing a very useful role here. They're not a substitute for a formal prioritization and strategic planning process, however. I think they augment it rather than replace it. With respect to basic research, I think there are two important questions. One is how much is done, but the second is how do you manage that so it eventually leads to useful Homeland Security applications that tie to threats, that tie to risks, and that tie to first responder needs. My own view is that it needs to be linked to solving some kind of a capability gap that's been identified or some kind of a strategic shortfall. And so far, that's difficult in part because the DHS process for determining requirements is fragmented and in some cases non-existent, with most DHS components unable to execute a rigorous requirements process. And then finally, I think it's important to focus on the transition from research into programs or into outcomes and results, whether that be incorporation and production of hardware or systems that are fielded, or the provision of standards or intellectual property, or even technical assistance that makes people smarter buyers, whether in DHS or in the broader community. And I think that kind of planning for transition needs to occur up front. The process that I lay out here, of course, is not easy. It's hard to develop broad plans. It's hard to have a structured planning process. It's hard to do the capability assessments. It's hard to show how they reflect in the budget. But I think it's important for you to lay that out as what your desired outcome is and try to get that from the government. With that, sir, I'll conclude my remarks and we'll stand ready for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berteau. Dr. Williams, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congressman Smith, it's a real pleasure to appear before you today to discuss the research priorities in the S&T Directorate of the Department of Homeland Security. Between June 2008 and June 2009, I chaired a panel of the National Academy of Public Administration, or NAPA, that conducted a study of the S&T Directorate. I'm joined today by Rick Cinquagrana and Lori Ekstrand, who led the work of NAPA's staff on the study. And some copies of the panel's report have been provided to your staff, and the report is also available online. The Academy panel offered findings and recommendations in several areas. My remarks today focus on three of them: strategic plans, the establishment of research priorities in the Directorate's transition portfolio, and the Directorate's role in basic research. Let me start with strategic plans. The S&T Directorate is responsible for two distinct strategic plans: an internal plan to guide its own work, and a federal-wide plan for civilian efforts to counter chemical, biological, and other emerging terrorist threats. The Directorate published an internal strategic plan, as Mr. Buswell mentioned, in June 2002. That plan describes the Directorate's structure, the roles of its integrated product teams, or IPTs, its mechanisms for reaching out to other organizations, and its plans for workforce development. But it does not meet the criteria of a strategic plan as the term is generally applied today across federal government. Among other things, the plan's mission statement understates the Directorate's range of responsibility, and the plan itself lacks a statement of long-term goals, and it does not discuss key external factors that could affect progress. We also found process weaknesses with regard to strategic planning, including a lack of involvement by key external stakeholders and the lack of a systematic scan of the environment. The panel recommended that S&T follow a strategic planning process outlined by the Government Accountability Office and OMB to develop a plan that can guide its work toward a set of specified goals. We found that the Directorate has not made progress on a strategic plan for the wider federal effort at all. To be fair, among federal departments, DHS has only the third largest budget for Homeland Security research and development, after the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Defense. To produce a federal research strategy with any teeth, S&T would need White House support. We recommended that S&T work with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and other federal departments to develop that broader plan. Let me turn now to the establishment of priorities in the transition portfolio. S&T's IPTs bring the Directorate's staff together with customers to establish priorities for projects. The IPTs appear to be useful vehicles for involving DHS's internal stakeholders in setting research priorities and for stimulating information exchange across the department. Nevertheless, we identified several problems. As an example, it appears that when the IPTs were formed, little guidance was provided on how to operate them. Each IP devised its own structure and processes through trial and error. Earlier this year, S&T was beginning to develop some standardized practices, but we still found substantial variation in structure, processes, customer satisfaction, and accomplishments among the IPTs. And finally, let me turn to S&T's role in basic research. Basic research is the seed corn for the development of future technologies, and no other organization in federal government has the mandate or the wherewithal to sponsor basic research in key areas related to Homeland Security, such as border protection, immigration, aviation security. That said, our panel found several potential weaknesses in this area, and I'll highlight just one. That's that many of the Directorate's basic research projects are awarded without competition and without external scientific peer review. Other federal research organizations routinely use competitive processes, including external peer review, to good effect. Our panel recommended that DHS S&T follow suit. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my prepared remarks, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. And now it is in order for the members of the committee to ask questions, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Buswell, I want to commend you and Vice Admiral Cohen for the job that you all have done. I believe that Admiral Cohen's goal was to increase basic research to 20 or 21%, and you have hit that metric. I think that on the basic research front, there may be some further discussion about how well that research is linked to the missions of DHS. But I think that overall, it is very, very important and commendable that you all have achieved that metric. I also think that it is very commendable that you've improved the IPT process significantly, and this panel may want to return to that topic. But there has been a dramatic improvement on that front. The area of concern, which I would like to discuss with you and the panel, is whether a systematic risk assessment and a strategic plan based on, at least in part, on that risk assessment would be helpful to the S&T Directorate and helpful to DHS. I think that there was some concern from outside that previously perhaps the Vice President's office drove priorities by a tremendous amount. I'm gratified to hear that it's become a more customer-driven process, and I think that is commendable, but a completely customer-driven process may not hit the risks that you want to hit. And I'd like you to tell this subcommittee what has prevented the S&T Directorate from engaging in a more systematic risk assessment. And then I'd like to encourage the rest of the panel to address what a more systematic strategic plan and also a use of risk assessment, particularly in an all-hazards approach, how that might benefit the S&T Directorate and DHS overall. Mr. Buswell, would you like to start this?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much. The answer to your question, does a systematic or comprehensive risk assessment help us in prioritizing our technology development, is absolutely. And the way that I think that it helps us do that is it helps the components whom we serve identify their priorities in a more systematic way. Let me just say that as I'm part of the QHSR steering committee, I don't want to get out in front of the headlights and usurp the Secretary's prerogative on the QHSR, but there is a substantial effort within that organization to address this risk assessment process and to define the scope with which the department ought to address that. And I think we'll be hearing more about that over the coming months. And S&T is delighted to provide input to that risk assessment, whether it be scientific modeling input or other kinds of capability gap identification processes that we have in place. And I think that over the long term, that will be a very valuable tool for the department writ large in identifying the operational requirements that it needs to address, both with technology and other ways. As Mr. Berteau said, though, this is a difficult thing to do, and but we're committed to doing it because it's the right thing to do, and it's the only way to get the best return for the investment.
Well, prior hearings on this topic have been somewhat contentious. It's rewarding to see that there has been progress made on the basic research front, on the IPT front, and I look forward to a report a year or two down the pike that we will be making, that we have made progress on systematic risk assessment and a strategic plan. Mr. Berteau, Dr. Depoy, Dr. Williams, would you care to add to this discussion about the strategic plan and about risk analysis?
I'd like to.
Please.
It strikes me that the assessment of threats, risks, and vulnerabilities is crucial to the development of goals and priorities, and that has to be the thing that starts the ball rolling on any strategic plan. And only with a firm strategic plan will the organization be able to decide on whether it should prefer this over that, this transition work over some other transition work, possibly in a completely separate part of the Department of Homeland Security. Now, one of the problems they have faced in the past was that they didn't have that threat and risk assessment coming down from the top of the department or even across the federal government. And I can understand that that's an issue for them, but, and they're hoping that the quadrennial Homeland Security will produce a threat and risk assessment that they'll be able to work with to establish their own internal goals. If that should not happen, if for some reason the threat and risk assessment that comes down from the top appears to be lacking, it strikes me that they still need to do something on their own to establish the threats and risks that they believe they're working to, even if it's dead wrong over the long term, even if it's not what they want 5 years from now. They need something internally to start the ball rolling and to be part of their strategic planning.
Mr. Buswell, are you waiting for the quadrennial review to supply you with a plan from on high or risk assessment also?
We're working in parallel with the quadrennial review on our own S&T strategic plan. What I want to emphasize, though, is we're not the tail wagging the dog here. We want to make sure that we're providing the technologies that are of the highest importance to the department, and that's the way we intend to approach this. I'm confident that the department will be able to establish strategic goals and objectives out of this strategic review, this quadrennial review. The risk assessment is a longer-term effort, and the risk assessment part of that will take and will be iterative over a number of years, and really will never be an ending effort because the threat constantly changes. So I'm confident that we'll have some input into our strategic plan. Now, keep in mind, from my perspective, science and technology should be not the end of the whip, but the handle of the whip. And as the strategy changes, we ought to our long-term focus ought to result in smaller changes within the S&T portfolio, assuming that we're investing in things that are of relevance to Homeland Security, than maybe some other things, some other strategic initiatives might that can offer nearer-term solutions. Things, policy changes and tactics changes and those kinds of things that can be implemented more quickly than technology can be developed.
Before we move on to Mr. Smith, if either you, Dr. Depoy, or you, Mr. Berteau, have something to say about risk assessment, threat assessment, and this strategic plan, I wanted to open it up to you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would note two things that I think are in addition to the comments that my colleagues have made here today. One is that we have a tendency to evaluate the efficacy of planning by how well it predicts the future. And that's the wrong metric to determine whether or not planning was of any value to us. Its real value is in how well it prepares us to deal with a future that we can't predict. And so it's possible under that kind of a rubric to look like you're fully compliant with OMB Circular A11's requirements for strategic plans, and you give GAO something that they can check or not check everything that you have or have not done, and yet it has done nothing to actually prepare you better to deal with a future that you can't predict. So we need to be careful that we don't get caught up into a checklist mentality for the value of strategic planning. The second is that a big element of that value comes from the process itself. And threat assessment and risk assessment, as well as incorporating existing legislation and existing strategies and stakeholder input, all of that comes into play. But what that process needs to produce is something that looks like strategic guidance, something that says to everybody involved in the Homeland Security enterprise, this is what's important, this is what you need to spend your time and effort on, this is where you spend your marginal dollars when they become available, this is how you know how to prioritize. That strategic guidance is a clear and important element of this process, and if it's not present, people have to make assumptions, and the assumptions may not be consistent either across the enterprise or over time.
Thank you, Mr. Berteau.
I just emphasize the point that Mr. Berteau made earlier, that this does have to be an enterprise-wide effort, and certainly the operating components must be a part of this this plan. It can't be produced in the Directorate by itself. So.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Williams notes in her testimony that the NAPA review of DHS Science and Technology found that many basic research projects funded by science and technology are done so without competition or peer review. and that the Directorate should work to make peer review and competition standard unless it is clearly not feasible. Mr. Buswell, do you agree with the finding and recommendation, and if so, how would you say it is being addressed?
Well, thank you, sir. I, in general, agree that competition is good, and that peer review is certainly one means of selecting, ensuring that we're selecting high-quality projects and that those projects are being executed in a high-quality way. Peer review using both internal and external reviewers, as I said, is a valuable way to do that. As Dr. Williams' panel noted, we have had quite a bit of success in the Center of Excellence selection process, which fundamentally does select some of the projects that, a good number of the projects that are conducted in the basic research portfolio through both internal and external review in series. And I think, as I said, the goal is that to make sure that we're getting out of the investment what we need, what we think we should. Let me also say that all proposals that come in from through the broad agency announcement process are in effect peer reviewed. Those proposals are reviewed by a panel of experts, subject matter, and perhaps stakeholder kinds of, practitioner kinds of review to make sure that that the proposal is sound and that it's executable and scientifically feasible. So in general, yes, I think that more competition is good. We establish a lot of that competition through the selection of the centers of excellence, the university-based centers of excellence, and we intend to continue to do that. We've been very successful in that realm. And then the other part of this, as I said, the two pillars of basic research are the centers of excellence and the DOE national laboratories. And we have started a renewed effort within the Directorate to ensure that the investments that are going to the national laboratories are being done in the best to the best effect of the taxpayer dollars, or to in the best interest of the government. And I look forward to strengthening that process with the national laboratories over the coming year. I think that's one of the things that we can improve Directorate wide. So. Short answer to your question, yes, I agree with her recommendation, and to the extent feasible, we should encourage competition to make sure we get the most benefit for the taxpayer dollar.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Williams, you noted in your testimony about milestones to track programs, and that they may not be meaningful indicators of progress, and there appears to be little or no consequence for missing them. Could you elaborate on the finding and certainly your recommendation, and then, Mr. Buswell, if you could provide reaction from the department's perspective?
One of the things that the panel looked at was whether the Directorate has processes in place to know what's going on inside of its projects. Have they established milestones? Are the projects meeting their milestones? And we noticed that there are milestones established, but that it seemed as though the majority of projects were missing their milestones, and there was very little consequence at the time that we looked at the Directorate for missing a milestone. In fact, the main consequence seemed to be to renegotiate the milestone and sort of start fresh with a new milestone on the same project. What we thought should be happening is that, for one thing, there wasn't a good record of what is going on that's causing so many projects to miss their milestones. Is there one thing that's happening continually? Are the milestones just not realistic from the beginning? And so we suggested that they do some systematic effort within the Directorate to pull together what's known about the milestones and why projects are missing them, and see if they can start to identify any patterns in that regard.
Mr. Buswell?
That was an excellent observation by the panel, and we appreciated their input on that. We've done a number of things. First of all, let me say that the milestone, using milestones as a metric of success in program management is only as good as the milestones that you establish. So we've taken a two-prong approach to this. One, we're looking at milestone development. What is a meaningful milestone and what isn't a meaningful milestone? What are we actually using to decide at some point in the process whether a project should go forward or not? I mean, is this actually going to result in a technology that will be of benefit to the department or of benefit to the first responder community? And so what are the key decision points? What are the key phase gates that we want to meet in those in managing those projects? So that's the first area that we focused on, is in establishing good milestones. Second, in response largely to the review that NAPA did and some input that we've gotten from the department program analysis and evaluation, I've tied the 6 division heads' performance evaluations to their division's meeting of milestones, and so it's tracked very carefully. They watch their program managers. Their managers are evaluated on meeting those milestones. And that's an effective tool, I think, to making sure that happens. Now, there is always unintended consequences. Our goal is to get technological capabilities to our customers. Our goal is not to properly manage projects. So I need to make sure that I'm not disincentivizing the program managers who may come across a technology that leaps their program of record. They would have no incentive to abandon the program of record because they're getting measured on whether they're meeting the milestones in that program or not, in order to adopt this leap ahead technology. So there's a balance here that I need to make sure I keep, which is maybe meeting 75% of the milestones is a reasonable number. I don't know. That's where we started. We started with setting the goal of 75% milestone completion. We achieved that metric this year. So if those are good milestones, then maybe we're there. But at the same time, I want to continue to reward those program managers who abandon their program of record because they've found something that it will actually deliver a capability sooner than their program would have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Mr. Tonko, would you prefer to defer your questions right now? Ms. Biggert, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would direct this question to Mr. Buswell. Anthrax has been mentioned as DHS's #1 terrorist threat, a threat supported by the findings of the Commission on the Prevention of Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism's recent progress report titled "The Clock is Ticking." Could you tell us about or explain for us the role of the Directorate in addressing this threat and the focus of science and technology and biopreparedness?
Yes, ma'am. Let me start by saying that the principal role of the Directorate in the national biodefense effort has to do with the threat assessment and determination process. So, what are the highest threats? What are the threats that we have to worry about above all others? Whether that's due to the likelihood that a terrorist could get a hold of this material, whether it's due to the consequences of a successful attack using the particular pathogen, and there are a lot of things that go into that threat assessment. So one of our major efforts is this biannual bioterrorism risk assessment that's then delivered to the federal community and drives the investment priorities across the federal government in biodefense. Whether those investment priorities are in surveillance, biosurveillance, environmental or other kinds of surveillance, whether that's in the prioritization of vaccine development within the HHS enterprise, or other kinds of intelligence community activities that might occur. So the threat assessment is fundamental to the activities of biodefense across the government. The second thing that we do within the S&T Directorate that really isn't done anywhere else in the government, and so is a unique mission that we have, has to do with the bioforensics aspect of things. Should there be a successful attack, such as happened in 2001. We now have the National Bioforensics Laboratory at Fort Detrick that the DHS S&T operates in order to attribute the attack in a way that that is meaningful from a law enforcement standpoint. In other words, we've partnered with the FBI such that we maintain chain of evidence. We do those kinds of things that will eventually result in successful attribution and prosecution of folks who do that kind of thing.
Thank you. Then just one other question on cybersecurity research. It seems like the bulk of the activities are operational focused and are in the National Protection and Programs Directorate. However, our committee has consistently emphasized the importance of R&D to successfully addressing cyber security over the long term. With that in mind, could you talk about the Directorate's cybersecurity R&D portfolio and if there's any new technologies like the smart grid that are being included in research assessments?
Yes, ma'am. We have our investment in cybersecurity over the last 3 years has essentially tripled, and much to the credit of highlighting the importance by committees such as this subcommittee, and then the identification within the president's own agenda. So the input function, if you look at funding that way, is going the right direction, in my opinion, and we're about where we should be, I think, for the near term. The key then becomes how do you link the priorities of that research to the overall priorities of both the department and the nation. And that is an area that we can improve significantly, and I'm working closely with the folks over at NPPD, Phil Reitinger, who's the Deputy Undersecretary at NPPD and is really responsible for the department's cybersecurity effort. We meet biweekly in a steering group that identifies not just the R&D priorities, but what are the cybersecurity priorities for the department, and how, from a collective effort within the department, can we best advance those priorities. So I will tell you that there is a lot of work to be done in cybersecurity, but there's a lot of people doing work as well. So the integration of all of the efforts that are going on, both in the public and the private sector, is fundamental to the success of cybersecurity. Dr. Depoy's panel did an excellent report for us on cybersecurity, and has established a number of recommendations. I don't know whether you, if you have time to expand upon that, but we do have a number of priorities, and smart grid technology, for example, to the extent that we can prevent attacks on the grid from cyberspace, fundamental to the continuity of those systems, which are important to the security and the stability of the country. Then we will invest in those in cooperation with the Department of Energy, who also has responsibility for the reliability of the electric grid.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Tonko?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps to Mr. Buswell, but anyone on the panel might have some input here. I do understand that at DHS, you have, to some degree, on a limited basis, resorted to that turnaround of program managers in your S&T operation. And it seems to be a practice that's resorted to by DARPA and NSF quite frequently. Is there a way to stretch that concept over a greater number of programs? How would you expand that practice within DHS to perhaps utilize that rotation more frequently?
Thank you. That's a great concept. The Congress, in its wisdom, in the Homeland Security Act of 2002, gave S&T, specifically the Homeland Security Advanced Research Projects Agency, HSARPA, the same authorities that DARPA has to hire technical experts out of the private sector or other civil service on a term basis, and that term is 5 years. Can be extended if for up to two more years under certain circumstances. We have the authorization to hire 20 such of these folks. We currently have 11. They're tied to the HSARPA portfolio primarily. It's about a $44 million a year portfolio. 11's about the right number to manage programs in that funding area. To stretch that beyond what we're doing right now, we would need to increase the innovation portfolio funding level, which I'd be delighted to do. But for right now, that we're about at the right place, I think, with that. And you're right; it's a valuable tool. It gives us special hiring authority, special compensation authority, so that we can get really top quality people out of the private sector and out of other areas of government to manage these kind of programs. It's paying off very well for us.
Okay. And any particular way to expand that program, though? Would there be certain focus to where you would use these 3 to 4 to 5 year assignments?
The focus that I would use it on is in the highly innovative kinds of research, in the things that are very high risk, higher risk than we typically address in the capstone IPT process. But that's what the innovation portion of the portfolio is for. It addresses the high risk prototypical demonstrations that, again, because they are high risk with a significant probability of failure, customers can't rely on us to provide that solution in the time that they might need it. So, the analogy that is sometimes used is the capstone IPTs provide the 3 megapixel camera to the 5 megapixel camera to the 10 megapixel camera, while we're looking in the innovation portfolio at the gigapixel camera. What can we do with a gigapixel camera that we can't do with the incremental improvement that we tend to pursue lower risk in the capstone IPT process? So that's the area I think that's the area that we have the authorization to do that kind of hiring in. And to me, that makes the most sense, because you want to get people in that are fresh out of the technology development arena, to manage those kinds of cutting edge programs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Berteau.
Yes, sir. I would like to add one additional thought to your question of opportunities for expanding what I think is a very useful potential to augment and enhance the government's the capability of the government workforce here. When the S&T Directorate was originally established, I think it was envisioned that it would have a more substantial and more powerful role in the acquisition side of the Department of Homeland Security than has evolved over time. I think we have an opportunity with the new administration to reevaluate and reconsider that. When I go back to the point I made about there needs to be a better planning for transition of research into programs, that's one of the areas where I think not only could the S&T Directorate play a better role across the department, but where, in fact, the opportunity for the term appointments and the capability that they bring both at the individual and the collective level would offer tremendous new capability for the entire Homeland Security enterprise.
Excellent. Anyone else? Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tonko. I want to follow up on Mr. Tonko's inquiry because this has become a topic of great interest to me, that some federal agencies do a very good job of rotating people in and out of Washington, D.C., whether it is for a multi-week internship or for a few months, or in some instances for a few years for positions as significant as being a program manager. DARPA does this, NSF does this, NIH does this, and integrates scientists from NIH, in the NIH instance, integrates scientists from around the country into the grant review and peer review process. And I'd like the panel to comment on how useful this might be. And Mr. Buswell, I'd like you to respond. Outside of the formal program of 20, what impediments do you see to DHS and the S&T Directorate implementing a broader program of linkages to academic centers, think tanks, the private sector, for bringing people in and out? Because it's not just for the benefit of the S&T Directorate. I think the residual benefit for the rest of the country is an appreciation for how the agency works and indeed how Washington works in some respects. And I'd like, to the extent any of you are interested in commenting on this, all of you to comment on it. Mr. Buswell, would you like to start?
Love to. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a number of other opportunities besides the, we call it the 1101s because it comes from the Defense Authorization Act, Section 1101. So these 11 employees that we have are affectionately termed 1101s. There are also a number of fellowship opportunities that we take advantage of, presidential management fellows, AAAS fellows, those kinds of things that I think are very valuable in getting people into the understanding of the federal government research and development community. Our Scholars and Fellows program within the Centers of Excellence is also one of the fundamental things that I think we're doing to improve that understanding and to get that rotation. We have funded over the last 6 years over 400 of these scholars and fellows across the country in areas of academic development that we think are fundamental to Homeland Security. They do internships in the summertime with the national laboratories and other federal research and development entities. And we think that that's really valuable. We don't have enough statistical information yet on the graduates to understand whether or not they're pursuing careers in the federal government, at least to start with. But we're hopeful that it will result in, a 10 to 20% perhaps participation of our Scholars and Fellows graduates in long-term federal employment. The other area that we can utilize, and we do utilize to a certain extent, is the Intergovernmental Personnel Act authorities, where we're able to bring on folks from state and local governments or from nonprofit organizations that can then work as they have really all the authorities of a federal employee with certain limitations dealing with their parent organization, conflict of interest limitations, as you would expect. But to a large extent, they're able to gain a great understanding of the way that we work within DHS, and they can take that back to their parent organization at the end of a 2-year period and utilize that to the benefit of their organization and to the benefit of our organization as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buswell. Comments from the rest of the panel in general or specifically on whether DHS is sufficiently linked to the rest of the research community, relevant research community. Dr. Williams?
Thank you. We used the word insularity in our report, and that may have changed over the past few months, but we were concerned that the Directorate wasn't reaching out enough to the outside world, and that caused two potential problems. One is that limits the access to the ideas and innovations that are going on the outside for those who are working inside the Directorate. But secondly, as you pointed out, it limits the ability of the community, the wider community, to learn what's going on inside the Department of Homeland Security and to start thinking about the problems that department has. We noticed it particularly in our discussions of the need for a peer review process. And in several interviews, we were told explicitly by members of the staff in the Directorate that peer review from outsiders wasn't needed because the program managers themselves were the world's experts in the area where they were reviewing projects. Now, I doubt that they are the only world's experts, but if they are the only world's experts, it tells you that we are desperately in need as a nation of getting their thinking, their expertise out to a wider community so that they won't be the world's experts in the future. And that thought built value for us into the notion of having much more external peer review.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Dr. Depoy.
Yes, I saw one very good example of this kind of connectivity last summer and the summer before. The ChemBio IPT annually holds a 3-day meeting in which they invite a lot of people from throughout government and academia, and they review nearly all their projects each year, and ask for their comments and certainly suggestions of where other things are going on. And it was one of the best meetings like that I've attended anywhere in the government. But I believe that's the only IPT that has done that, as far as I know. But I think they've done it now for several years.
So a model for emulation.
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Berteau.
Thank you, sir. I think there's one other potential advantage to an expansion such as Mr. Tonko's offered, and you've continued in the discussion here, and that is the benefit back to the user community. I think one of the real challenges in Homeland Security S&T is that the users often do not know the art of the possible. They're trying to set a request or a requirement based on what they think they need without having really defined the problem and without knowing the art of the possible. And I think one of the downstream benefits of expanding this kind of involvement with people is the benefit upon return and going back to where they've come from. And if we build that into the process, there could be some additional advantages downstream.
Thank you very much. I think this will be a topic of continuing interest to the subcommittee. Do we have any further inquiries on this side? Mr. Tonko, I understand that you all have worked very hard in your testimony. I'd like to offer you a moment to comment or to comment on any other aspects of the topics that we've been delving into that we have not covered in Q&A or in your written testimony. I want to offer you an opportunity to expand on any thoughts that you think would be helpful for the subcommittee's inquiry. Mr. Berteau?
I do have one final thought for you to keep in mind as you're evaluating DHS's performance in this regard. It's been my observation from my time in Washington that much of the federal government tends to do its research work, and the beneficiary or the customer is outside the government. It's the general population or some subset of the general population. They may not know who they are at the time the research is done, but that's the goal of those programs. In some agencies, the Defense Department being perhaps the primary one here, the beneficiary of the research is actually internal. Most of the research that the Defense Department does, it does for itself. It's the ultimate consumer of that research. And that tends to have a different focus, a different validation process, maybe even a different peer review process. DHS is a hybrid of the two. And in some cases, that makes it much more complex and much more difficult for all of those elements to be welded together. And I think it's useful as you set your bar of how DHS is performing to keep that in mind, that it really is a hybrid. Much of what it does for itself, or at least for the broader first responder community. Much of what it also does for the external community. And sometimes those are two different processes and two different standards. So I would leave that just for your thought.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berteau. Dr. Williams?
If I could bring up one other point. We talked about how important the internal process is once you're inside an IPT for making sure that the priorities that are set within an IPT have something to do with the customer's needs and what the customer is asking for. But one of the astonishing things we found was that there's no transparent mechanism at all to compare priorities and reallocate the transition funds among the various IPTs. And that means that the broad allocation of money across the Directorate doesn't necessarily reflect key priorities or allow for taking advantage of emerging opportunities that may happen in one area as opposed to the other. It also means that the bottom of the funded projects in one IPT may be significantly less important to DHS as a whole than something that's close to the top of the unfunded projects in another IPT, again, because there's no comparison and work across the IPTs for setting priorities. Now, some of this goes back to the fact that there's no strategic plan. With no genuine strategic plan, there's no established goals that everybody agrees to, and that makes it hard to try to divide the money up any different way among the IPTs than the way it was divided last year. But it struck us that something needs to be done about that. They need an explicit mechanism within the Directorate for dividing money among the IPTs.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams, and thank you all very much for contributing to our consideration, to contributing to Mr. Buswell and the department's consideration. I think it's fair to summarize that much progress has been made since the series of hearings began. We will continue this series of hearings, and we look forward to making additional progress with the S&T Directorate and with DNDO. We do face some different challenges, as Mr. Berteau pointed out, that this is a hybrid organization with significant consumption within the department, but also a large customer base for its products outside the department, and that presents some special challenges. I want to thank all the witnesses for appearing this afternoon. The record will remain open for 2 weeks. I expect that there'll be some submitted questions about the IPTs and consistency. Members and the staff may seek answers to any follow-up questions that the committee may ask. Now, I want to thank you for your testimony and your presence here today. The witnesses are excused, and the hearing is adjourned.